Hello and welcome. My name is Maren Sakri. I run demand generation for Evolv Technologies. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen in. This is our 5th virtual panel in the Think CX Digital Leaders Tell All series. Today, we're focused on the digital race for relevance in food and beverage. Before I introduce our panelists and moderator, if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to ask those in the Q&A area, and we will try and cover those at the end. If we don't get time to cover those, we will be sure to follow up with an email. For those of you that may be triple tasking, we will absolutely distribute a recording after the event. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel of digital leaders. Frank Paci is the CEO of The Corner Bakery. He is an accomplished executive with over 25 years of experience leading retail and food service brands. Most recently served as the president and CEO at Einstein Noah Restaurant Group. He previously was president and CEO of McAllister's Deli, and also the EVP and CFO at The Pantry, a publicly traded convenience store chain with over 1,500 locations. Prior to that, he held senior leadership and franchise development positions at Blockbuster, Pizza Hut, and Burger King. Thanks for joining us, Frank.
Welcome.
Brandon Wishnow is the EVP Measurement and Activation at Ovative Group. He leads a cross-functional team made up of strategy, technical, and analytics talent. He is tasked with building and wielding omnichannel and marketing measurement solutions that drive value to the enterprises at large. Thanks for joining us, Brandon.
Here.
Darius Abbassi is the growth and Martech lead at Albertsons Companies. He's a Silicon Valley veteran with 2 decades experience in defining, building, and scaling profitable multi-sided marketplaces. Welcome, Darius.
Thank you.
Jo Hamburge is the VP of Strategy Consulting at Ovative Group. She leads our strategy consulting practice, leveraging 20 years of experience in management consulting, corporate strategy, and project management in retail and financial services. Welcome, Jo.
Thanks for having me.
And our moderator, Michael Scharf, is the CEO of Evolv Technologies. He brings over 2 decades of digital commerce and retail experience with leadership roles at some of the most well-known retailers in North America, including Sears Canada, Toys R Us, Staples, and Best Buy. If you missed any of our other webinars in this series, visit evolv.com events to watch. And without further ado, I will pass it over to Michael to get us kicked off.
Thanks, Maren, and thanks to all of the participants in today's panel and to all of those who are joining us today. We look forward to sharing interesting dialogue with all of you and hope to get some feedback afterwards. So to kick it off, Jo, the grocery and restaurant businesses obviously look significantly different today than they looked even 3 months ago. We've seen tremendous change. Having consulted with numerous companies in the space for many years now, can you tell us how their priorities have shifted recently? And how well would you say the grocery chains overall have adapted to the new environment under COVID?
Yeah, thanks. So let's talk about grocers. I would say their priorities haven't changed, but the crisis of the pandemic has been a tremendous accelerator in the importance of the priorities. Maybe if we take a consumer lens approach at this, let's think about how consumers shop, what they buy, and what they care about. So how they shop, essential businesses, grocers are open, but it's been an unusual time to be shopping as we've all experienced. So grocers have had to rapidly accelerate previously nice to have omnichannel fulfillment capabilities in order to meet the tremendous mass adoption in the channels and expecting that demand to continue. 1/3 of grocery shoppers made their first online purchase in the past month. More than half of online grocery shoppers say the pandemic is causing them to permanently change their behavior. And overall, shoppers are making fewer, bigger trips, and many are focused on the health and safety of the stores that they enter. So how they shop has really, really changed, as you know. What they buy, lots was made last year talking about the demise of packaged food in the favor of fresh foods. This year changed the way we think about our pantries. So folks who never even had a pantry had to think about what a 14 or 30-day supply of food would look like for their household. And I'm one of them. In-stocks has always been really important, but as buying pattern shifts, in-stocks are still important, but grocers have had to respond to panic buying, in terms of, or with creativity in the supply chain, package sizes, substitutes, limits on purchases. As unemployment rises and budgets get tight, private label will continue to increase in importance. And consumers are actually finding that they're okay with the substitutes. So there may be some follow-on impact for the name brands. And lastly, prices. Prices are going up. Prices rose 2.6% in April, the largest monthly increase since 1974. So some big changes in terms of what consumers are buying. And then lastly, what do they care about? Marketing and messaging has been really interesting in these times. Consumers don't really want to hear about what's on sale, and grocers don't need to drive traffic, but consumers want to hear, what are grocers doing to keep them safe? What are they doing to keep their employees safe? When the stores are open, when the hours are being modified, how they can get a delivery slot. So many grocers have pulled way back on advertising in favor of messaging like this, and some who haven't are actually experiencing a little bit of blowback. Loyalty program messaging can have a place here as grocers pass on the price increases and consumers have an even greater need for savings. So overall priorities, kind of all the same things, but just different, and the level of urgency is just a lot stronger.
Yeah, I think the urgency and the shift to digital is really interesting to see, because I think the grocery industry is obviously slowly started to adopt digital, certainly with a couple of key big players, but I think the whole industry now is obviously pivoting very quickly, and it's interesting to see how different companies are adapting.
Yeah. The second part of your question was about, how have they been adapting, and maybe just 3 quick points on that. Grocers who have made strategic digital investments, or at least started, are faring the best because they've had a place to start from. Second, those with broad assortments, so like Target on the essentials or Walmart, are also doing well in terms of sales. And then lastly, those who have quickly addressed the need for in-store safety, like we've been talking about, so Whole Foods, even some regional grocers like Price Chopper, are actually appearing to gain customers, even price-sensitive ones, as they focus on, as consumers focus on valuing the safety of the experience. So some really interesting adaptations in the grocery market.
Yeah, I thought your comment on private label was interesting too, and I think that might be one of the reasons driving traffic to stores like Whole Foods. I've seen a dramatic shift just on the shelves in the stores with the amount of private label product they have now. And the price gap is dramatic. It's bigger than I've seen in the past. So I think clearly chains are starting to take advantage of the opportunities as they see traffic patterns change. Darius, what are you seeing within Albertsons on some of these trends?
Well, I would definitely second everything Joe just said. I mean, those are, and I couldn't have said it better, those are all absolute truisms. I think if, maybe I might add, is the only thing to really add to that, because she covered quite a bit for us, is, traditionally grocers have been item-focused retailers, right? In many cases, it's like, if you look at our shelves, our digital shelves mirror the physical reality, in the sense that it's item-based add to cart, right? Where people are price shopping bananas, bacon, water, bread, whatever that might be. We're seeing a move towards more solutions focus, whole basket. Do you have what I need in inventory now? And so maybe the CPG preference goes out the window, right? From Charmin to just, do you have toilet paper? Do you have bread? Do you have baker's yeast, right? Do you have flour? Do you have sugar? Do you have eggs, right? Down to the staples and inventory. And so we will take what we can get, and we want the whole basket, and we want it right now. In stock, do you have it in stock? Can I pick it up? Can you deliver it? When can I get it? Senior hours, right? These are questions, right? So we're seeing the inquiry move in some cases from just searching items in Google, where they hit our website and they look at product detail pages, to hitting us in Google Maps. And so we were the first grocer in the country, I think in the world, to partner with Google and to use their AI and our FAQs, and to tune an AI-driven chatbot where users could go to Google Maps, ask for where the closest Safeway was, or Albertsons was to them, to then ask, is it open, and what are your senior hours? And then enter a dialogue that way. So we're seeing a migration from phones to chat through various interfaces, and the questions we're getting are not, what's the price of bananas? It's, exactly as Joe said, are you open? What are my options? How do I stay safe? These sorts of things. And so we're adapting quickly to the types of questions we're getting and the ways in which those questions are coming at us. And they're coming at us through chat. They're coming at us through Google Maps, and we're adapting in that respect. And so it's been a learning experience, to say the least, because it's been drinking from a fire hose with respect to the data digitally that we have to respond to.
Great, thank you. Brandon, what do you think grocery chains and restaurants should be prioritizing now as we think about this pivoting towards a much more digital-centric future for food service and food delivery and dining? I think it's a fascinating challenge, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, it is fascinating. It's a fascinating, unfortunate but somewhat fascinating time, especially as sort of the data measurement nerd in the group here. I think, what Joe and Darius, both just commented on, I think are a lot of leading indicators of, what to think about when prioritizing. At the highest level, I think, at least at Ovative and for myself, when talking to retail more broadly or our food and beverage clients, we've been thinking about two overarching questions when thinking about focusing on, the right priorities. The first is, and I think most paramount, how can companies learn about and work to retain their newly acquired customers? The second, speaking to, again, a lot of what was already said or evidence that's already been shared, what digital capability investments are going to deliver not just value now, but the highest return over the longer term. From an acquisition perspective, retailers have remained, those have been fortunate enough to remain open and doing pretty well throughout this unfortunate time period. They've acquired a lot of new customers, more than normal, and some maybe similar to their original or pre-COVID period consumer base, but a lot that are atypical from that customer profile as well. I think my wife, 2 kids and I are good examples of a family that, we probably used to do online grocery shopping half the time or a little less, curbside pickup basically never after a couple bad experiences. And now we're online shopping, maybe for obvious pandemic reasons, but also just because we prefer it 100% of the time. And we're loving the curbside pickup across all, retail that we've been, engaging with. So it's been a super interesting experience for us. And I think, we might be a good example or represent at least a family perspective. And there's lots of different profiles here. From a measurement and data perspective, I'm really interested to see how retailers, and grocers and restaurants in particular respond. How are they going to learn about, for those brands that I was loyal to or customers loyal to already, how are they going to learn about me and what preferences have shifted? And those that acquired me, what are they going to do to keep me there and stay loyal to their brand or increase loyalty to their brand? So I think the overall recommendation, coming out of this, I think is, what can you do to use the data, use the measurement, use the analytics you have to keep learning about your consumer preferences and their shifts in behavior, both to, know how to, engage with them from a broader nurturing and marketing strategy or even assortment and so on. But also from, going back to the question around the digital investment perspective, like what digital investments are going to make the biggest difference? And I'm curious to actually hear other folks, other parts of the panel, or or Michael, your comments on this before going any deeper, because I think there's so many different directions you can go from a digital perspective. But what is really gonna, if you use the data to drive the decisions, and you use the data to understand consumer preferences, there's a whole host of things you could be doing. I'm curious what's top of mind for Frank, or Darius, or Joe, and you, Michael, as well.
Yeah, that's great. Frank, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, one of the challenges in the restaurant business is, from a consumer behavior, there's also a geographic transition that's happened, right? Some of our best locations were downtown locations where we did huge catering business and where we had, big lunchtime business from people that were working in the office buildings, right? Well, nobody's working in the office building, right? And so, I think like a lot of people have talked about, a lot of the strategies that we're following are similar to what we were following previously. We're just having to accelerate them maybe a little bit faster and with more focus, because you kind of lost, in our business, we're starting to see some reopening now, but you lose 100% of your dining room business. We lost 95% of our catering business, which makes up 27% of our business, right? And so those are tough to overcome, regardless of what you do with some of the technology. And you've seen change in usage patterns about breakfast. If people aren't going to work, they're not going to breakfast, which our concept does a big bunch of business in breakfast, right? So part of that is to say, okay, great. As we're now looking, we closed a lot of our locations. As we're looking at reopening, we're actually looking at reopening the locations that fit what the consumer behavior is currently first, and then migrating as we see the changes. So we're actually analyzing open stores and saying, hey, we can see suburban stores in markets that have already loosened stay-at-home restrictions are doing X, versus urban stores are down 60% in their takeout business. So while our business was a over 60% off-premise business, the people who are taking advantage of that off-premise business aren't there anymore, right? And so until those patterns change, and it'll be fascinating to see, once people have gotten used to working from home, how does that change, and how does that affect the restaurant industry, which was primarily a single person lunch business? How does that change? And then it depends on your access mode. Our restaurants that have drive-throughs are seeing positive comps, where our urban stores are negative 70%, right? So it's really a fascinating exercise to see that all happening at the same time. So
yeah, here in Northern California, we've seen a number of large tech companies announce either permanent or semi-permanent work from home strategies for their companies, their employees, like Twitter and Square and Facebook. And it will be interesting to see if that trend takes hold in other parts of the country and other industries, and then what are the implications for locations for restaurants, and the idea that neighborhood grocery stores, neighborhood restaurants, as opposed to those kind of dense urban cores or office parks, are going to see a big shift in terms of demand, and hopefully create some new opportunities for growth.
It also have implications in terms of real estate values, and what are you paying for the real estate. There's a lot of kind of knock-on effects of the changes in behaviors that we're all talking about here. Yeah,
and it'll be fascinating to see if they continue, or if they are kind of short-term behavioral changes only in large cities. So I don't think we're going to know for a while what the longer-term implications are. So let me continue on that, Frank. So if you knew a year ago what was coming, how would you have prepared differently? What would you have started to do a year ago? And I think a lot of the things you just talked about probably would answer that around locations, but what other things might you have thought about doing as you prepared for this?
As I joked around, I said I thought about selling the business potentially, right? if you think back. So, but no, what you would have done, I think, is you would have looked at. We were already looking at things like whether it's ghost kitchens, things that will change the cost structure of the business, right? In a business where, and we've talked about this a little bit. And fascinating as you see third-party growth, and we've gotten deals struck with all of the third-party growth, third-party delivery providers, DoorDash, Grubhub, Postmates, and Uber Eats. So we've already been developing that business. We're actually working on the dispatch business, which is Olo, which is our online ordering provider, that you can go directly to our site and have it fulfilled by a third-party delivery, right? So that way we retain the customer information. So we might have pushed that a little bit faster, because then I can make offers to them. I can include them in my loyalty program as we go forward with those kind of things, right? So as that becomes a more important part of the business if this work from home trend all stays, right? So knowing what you know now, you may have done some of those things a little bit more accelerated. I think the other thing that's interesting as an opportunity is, you may do things that in the past you thought were risky to do, like streamlining your menu, because in the past people would have said, "Oh my God, you took away my favorite product," right? That's always one of those things as you do that. But in today's world, I think people are understanding and saying, "Hey, I realize that things are a little bit different. I'm willing to accept that more." So it may give you an opportunity to accelerate innovation or streamlining your operations or doing some things because, well, certainly for us, we had locations that were closed. People may have not been in them now for a month and a half, right? They come in, they know things are different, and they may be willing to accept that kind of change, which helps us in terms of reducing waste and profitability, but continue to feature our best-selling products in that. So I think there are things like that there may have been things before you thought, hey, this is a risky move, where now it's kind of an essential move, and it allows you to kind of accelerate some of those changes. So.
That's great insight, and actually a great pivot to the next question. So Joe, with all the work you've done with grocery chains, and as we start to see a dramatic increase in delivery services like Instacart and Shipt and Uber Eats, Grubhub, how are grocery stores and restaurants shifting their business models from your perspective to accommodate these services, and what kinds of new businesses are we seeing develop, like ghost kitchens that Frank mentioned and others?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting and so challenging, as Frank was talking through. Pre-COVID, grocers were still evaluating, in many cases, the trade-offs between the partnership with the food delivery services. So Instacart, Shipt, Uber Eats, even, in the trade-off between partnering versus building themselves. And recall, grocery as an online category was really a laggard, compared to almost all of the other categories. So grocers were really evaluating the trade-offs, and as demand for those kind of previously nice to have, not sure what percent of our consumer base is going to take them up, rapid change, many were forced to quickly partner with Instacart or others to meet that consumer need. And in some cases, grocers entered into maybe some less than desirable financial agreements, just not having the luxury of time. Instacart's clearly the leader of the pack these days, but unique financial challenges in terms of their business model, not only the fees, which can be like 3x, what a grocer could do if they could fulfill themselves, if they built the capability, but also the consumer experience is shut off from the grocer. So the experience, as well as in many cases, the data. So a real trade-off going in, and now grocers find themselves in the middle of the pandemic with, huge reliance on these services. And I would say huge, the demand will continue, as Brandon was saying, and as the data suggests, consumers are actually really liking these fulfillment models. So now the grocers, and maybe the smaller ones are a little different than your Amazon or your Walmart or your Target, but have to really figure out, okay, now that this is a long-term digital investment, like what is the right arrangement that I need to be in? And it's tricky to evaluate. In terms of, other angles on the business model front, that's just sort of for online and delivery. So kind of mirroring that and creating your own parallel pick thing is one thing, but, kind of back to some of the mix that Darius, I think, was talking about, even, meal kits and grab and go. What a huge challenge for grocers to get the perishability and the volume right for those categories. And now, off the charts there. And in addition, all the restaurants are getting into that game. So you've got increased competition on those categories. Whereas other investments, healthy salad bar, entree bars, food as an experience, there's much less demand for some of those trends. So some pretty big shifts and some really interesting business models to adjust to, and some challenges to work out.
Yeah, I think I saw a picture yesterday of a salad bar from a grocery store that was filled with beer. Trying to find creative ways to use the space that is no longer functional, and stores pre-packaging lots of food that would normally be bought in bulk. Darius, what are some of the things that you guys are seeing and experiencing on your end?
Well, I mean, if I were to, maybe if I answer the prior question, I think, what would we do differently? I think, we got caught where we had to create emergency catalogs, and emergency catalogs were necessary in the sense that there were certain things that people were going to be focused on, and there were others that we were going to find ourselves out of stock. The user experience digitally was terrible because just because of the technical ramifications of pulling things out of stock, and the impact to Google and what that does, and that it can get really wonky with respect to what happens when you do it in digital. So being able to have emergency catalogs, but also we were and are still working on micro fulfillment centers and looking at dark stores and figuring out better ways to perhaps stock pantry staples in micro fulfillment centers and have your emergency catalog able to be fulfilled through that, such that you can better operationalize what's in stock in which particular store and ensure that the customer gets what they're looking for, rather than take the system down, focus only on the crisis catalog, say, hey, we only have 25% of what we used to have, but at least we can guarantee delivery at a certain time. I think we could get a lot smarter with that, real-time inventory planning and really rethinking how stores work to support delivery. And so I think we're working on that, but I think if you gave us 18 more months, I think we would have been better prepared. I also will second what Joe's saying is that, work from home is moving towards, cook from home. And that means 3 meals, not just for yourself, but everybody in your home. And that invokes meal planning and replenishment. And then longitudinally, hey, I don't like the comfort foods. I don't like the COVID-19 that I've gained. What else can I do? And I think there's a lot more value to be added. And I think, where we've been focused at the bottom of the funnel in the digital space, where we're competing to get that customer, get them into, a relationship, the danger of being intermediated by the 3PL providers, losing that customer data, losing that relationship at the door. I think there's a way to reclaim that. And a way to reclaim that is to add much more value at the middle of the funnel with respect to not just prepared meals, but helping, whoever the head of the household is who's responsible for feeding the family, adding more value to them and making their lives better, in that respect, not just simply optimizing at the price of bananas, but optimizing for their entire sort of lifestyle, or I should say, new stage of their lifestyle. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for us. And also, I think the last thing I would say on this is long tail. There's a lot of products digitally that we could support for consumers that we don't currently stock. So being able to provide local providers of a variety of different types of plant-based diets and things of that nature that maybe would not be easy for us to stock, but we could ship, and combine them, I think there's a lot more value we could be adding than just simply delivery of foodstuffs.
That's great. Yeah, I have some empathy for the complexity of what the industry is going through right now, trying to figure out how to deal with things like curbside pickup and shipping, really with no notice. At Best Buy and Toys R Us, when we initiated programs like in-store pickup and ship from store, we literally took over 12 months to design the processes and the systems to do this. And being forced to pivot your entire logistics model and your customer engagement model, within a matter of weeks is a pretty daunting challenge. So for all of you who've actually managed to figure out how to do it, even in a half-hearted way, I think it's very impressive, and just shows a commitment that I think all of you have to helping clients and serve your customers. It's no small feat, especially for a large chain. Frank, so what new innovative ideas are you thinking about during this period of social distancing at Corner Bakery? And what are the things that are really starting to drive some of your kind of post-pandemic behaviors and changes?
I think things we're looking at is family meals, or given that there's more our business historically has been lunchtime single guest, right? Now that you've got people working at home, can you do things that are more of a family meal? And bundling that in some way, leveraging some of the catering. I mean, we've always done catering, which is to a group, right? So how can we do that to a household to simplify those kind of things, as well as are there new products or new sizes or new things that we need to do? We talked about the limited menu. How do we leverage both, a limited menu, but also give you a variety by giving you, by packaging things together? Are there opportunities that we can do with that? We were already kind of moving on some of the eating trends. I mean, we've always offered a combination of comfort foods as well as, salads and kind of more healthier items. So I think we're kind of well positioned to service those needs. It really just creates an opportunity. And then the other thing is, from a marketing standpoint, how do you market in this time place, right? Historically, we spent a lot of money on locations to make those convenient. How do you, so as a result, we had great locations that you'd see, but now when you go, and if you're going to DoorDash or Uber Eats, how do you stand out on that platform from others? Because virtually everybody has the same real estate, right? You even see the advent of virtual restaurants. So one of the things that we've talked about is, do we create additional kind of facings on there that says, hey, we have great pastas, but I'm not sure that everybody thinks about us as a pasta place. They think of us more as a sandwich place. So should we create our own pasta brand and serve that out of our existing kitchens, right? Because you're seeing that now where, okay, you've got this asset that is being underutilized potentially. Are there more things that you can push through that at the same time and get more space on advertising these, right? Because I tend to think of the third-party providers for us as a marketing tool, right? We always talk about marketing and paying for impressions. Well, how many impressions do I get if you go to DoorDash versus if you go to cornerbakery.com, which I've then got to try to figure out how to lure you there and pay you there, right? Yeah. And if I talk about a target customer, my target customer, somebody who's going to DoorDash or Uber Eats, or somebody who's getting ready to buy food. So how do I put my food in front of them and make that a compelling offer to them, right? So I think there are different ways to think about these things in the world that has become even more important digitally than it was before. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a parallel in e-commerce, and for traditional retail, we saw the barriers to entry really drop for companies to create new brands and for new players to get into the space as the need for a physical store went away. And I think for restaurants, maybe the first instance of that was the advent of food trucks becoming really popular with a significantly lower capital cost. But now with delivery services and things like ghost kitchens, where you can lease a kitchen to, start a restaurant on the fly, it creates a lot of potential disruption and also a lot of opportunity for innovation in the restaurant space.
Well, it also potentially leads to a different development strategy, right? So if I was running another brand and thinking about, okay, great, I've got to go in and do all the real estate and all the operations, right? Maybe I strike a deal with Corner Bakery and I sell my products out of Corner Bakery's kitchen to delivery only, which allows me to expand the brand faster potentially than it would have gone historically in finding a franchisee, training them to do the operations and all those kinds of things. So I think, there's a lot of stuff that you just have to rethink as you go forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Brendan, did you want to weigh in there? You look like you had a... No.
Sure. Yeah. Well, one thing that, some of the commentary that Frank, you had made up until this point, and then you were just walking through just now, is what I was thinking about how to empathize with not just like what you prioritize and where what you prioritize, but also the timing of it. Like you may know that you need better curbside delivery investment. You may know you need a more seamless mobile app, shopping experience. You may know you need the family meal kits, but without clear confidence and understanding of like when is the right time to pull the trigger and how is consumer preference going to shift and on what time frame, how do you know when and what amount to invest in even time? How do you test and learn into it? So I've just been sort of thinking about that a lot throughout this dialogue and appreciating that challenge, but also then thinking, there's a taking it back to the data aspect and tying back to the customer with every new investment that you do make. And I think, Frank, you were hitting on this, and Darius, you were hitting on this too. How are you always asking the question, what additional information can I capture about my end consumer so that I can understand how their buying patterns or their preferences are shifting and continually pulse what's going on in the marketplace? And in doing so, at least you can keep getting smarter, because in this time, it's so uncertain ahead. How are we going to predict with any confidence? I think we'll get more and more confident, right? But it's going to take some time, and it's going to be continually changing. So with every investment you do make, how are you making sure that you're using it as an opportunity to collect more information in ways that maybe you would have thought about before, but the urgency and like strategic value of it is at a whole new level.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so why don't we move on to another topic? Darius, you've thought a lot about the enormous amount of data that grocery stores hold about how people eat, drink, and shop. How should grocery stores use this data to maximize revenue and drive customer loyalty in this new environment that we're facing right now?
Well, Michael, that's quite a small question.
It's basically your whole existence, I know.
Yeah, I mean, if I could answer that question, I wouldn't be on this panel. I would be would be on an island somewhere. Maybe let's break it down. The enormous amount of data. So I can say some of the data we sit on and some of the things we'd like to do with the data, right, to add value. We sit on a lot of your transactional history, right, over time, things that you have purchased. And we may be able to look at the fact that, you've never purchased anything with meat in it. You've never purchased anything with gluten in it. Why are we sending you or spending any time trying to, if you churned as a customer, lure you back with CPG ads and offers, which we should know that are of no interest to you. And if anything, it reminds you that we know nothing about you. So it reinforces the fact that we're really just a dumb shelf and a warehouse with the logo on it. If we know what you're purchasing, and we also can look in and I would say, let me step back for a second. Not only you've never purchased anything with me, but if we can start to look at the presence of children in the household and the foods that you're purchasing for them, we can build a better picture as to what your preferences are. And if we can build a better picture of what your preferences are, we could also begin to help you make better meal planning decisions that are not, I don't mean just healthier, you're in charge of what that is, but we could certainly make it faster and easier. And we could find CPG partners that want to speak to you and could reward you in ways that you want to be rewarded. And that could be long tail products, it could be dietary, it could be content, it could be any number of value added services that we currently do not engage in and do not leverage. So I think that there's a lot of really interesting things that we could be doing from services and content. Mm-hmm. And I would say, and to add more value and to not be just simply seen as a commodities warehouse. If we do not do this, then the 3PL providers, the Instacarts and others will intermediate and will do it. And so I think the most dangerous thing is a situation where geography no longer is a strategic advantage to us, right? Essentially, when we got you in the store, the odds of you, leaving and switching to another store simply because bananas are cheaper across the street is much, much lower. But in a digital environment, the friction is nearly zero. And as we saw in consumer electronics earlier on, shopping comparison engines kind of intermediated, and you could, see price transparency. So suddenly now you're not just, optimizing for the, items, but you're optimizing for the entire cart. And there are ways in which we should be aware of how that data could be used essentially against us, all retailers, right? So I think there's a lot of opportunity to also get smarter about what we have at each individual store, and inventory and stock status, so that we can add more value there, so that, you know, we can save you a trip or send you somewhere else. And so there's a lot of things that we could be doing with that data that we'd like to do, but it's very challenging. We're sitting on a lot of old legacy systems.
It is, and I think that the whole concept of digital personalization has been around for a long time. Certainly, you know, since the early days of e-commerce, we all envisioned this opportunity to use customer data to really personalize their online digital experiences and only present relevant and timely products to them. But it's a lot harder to execute than I think many of us had expected it would be. It's still a challenge, and I think, you know, various industries certainly are further along than others, but there's clearly, you know, a huge opportunity to continue to improve the customer experience through the data that we gather and finding, you know, innovative ways to use that with new technologies like AI and others that can take some of the heavy lifting from the teams to help drive that.
Yeah, that's a plug for you guys, because, you know, we're not going to build that type of personalization and landing page optimization and sort of behavioral analysis ourselves. It's impossible. The combinatorial, you know, math on the SKU volume and then when you get into recipes and portion size, I mean, I mean, you're talking about really big numbers, but if we can get more data to you, so that, you know, providers of technology, you know, can fit into a part of our stack, then we're much farther along the path of adding value to consumers and feeling more personal and more reactive responsive than we have been.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, Brandon, when you were talking earlier about how your family's behavior has changed, you know, one of the things that struck me is the brands that you shop with, whether it's restaurants or groceries, they should know that you're 100% delivery customer or 100%, you know, curbside pickup, and they should default to those options. And we still, as an industry, I think, are struggling on how we actually adapt to those, you know, signals that we're getting from clients to be able to make those real-time decisions for them, you know, and give them the option if they want to change, but make it really easy for them to do what they've chosen to do every other time they visited us. I think it's a big opportunity still.
I think that's a great point there. And I also think that it aligns back to, it's more of a privacy driven data theme, I would say, than something that is specific to, you know, the pandemic or food and beverage. But I think it's very relevant here, which is sort of the buzzwordy term of like zero party data, or, you know, these sort of representative profiles that you can create about yourself and tell the browsers, tell the search engines, tell retailers or companies the information selectively that you're in control of about the preferences you want them to see. And I wonder, this conversation is making me think, will that path in some way accelerate? Because historical data may not be representative of what the consumer preference is, but the consumer knows what their preference is now. Yeah. So how could we give them the mechanism to tell you more easily and more, you know, more nimbly and more frequently in ways that they're comfortable with, rather than relying on history to sort of try and predict something that is not really going to be that useful.
Yeah, and I think to your point, the whole issue of data privacy is clearly a really hot button topic right now, and I think we're going to see a lot of changes, you know, over the next several years around how data is treated and ownership of data, and, you know, it's obviously something that states and countries are wrestling with. But I think at the end of the day, yeah, if we need to give customers the tools to both control their data and then also help us understand what it is they need in context in real time. Frank, can you talk a little bit about your loyalty program and how that comes into play? You know, especially now that, you know, we are focused on a much more digital engagement, and, you know, what you guys are doing differently in that space today and how data, you know, affects that.
Yeah, well, we've just started relaunching our loyalty program. You know, I've always struggled with what's the purpose of a loyalty program. Obviously, I think one of those things has ultimately been to change the guest behavior, which I think obviously is difficult to do. But I think there's another piece of this, which is what I'll call the recognition of the guest, right? So for me, you know, as I think of myself as a customer, you know, I fly a decent amount, and so I'm familiar with all the airline loyalty programs and what I get. And I get kind of special treatment from them because I'm a frequent flyer, right? So I think part of what we've tried to do with ours is to create a tier-based program that qualifies you for benefits as opposed to what I call a got you loyalty program, right? Where it's, okay, great, you got 1,000 points and I'm going to send you a coupon that's good for 2 weeks. Well, if my frequency isn't every 2 weeks, that may not have much value to me. So how do I try to understand, again, back to this thing we were talking about, understanding the guests and make the program work for them, right? So if you're a frequent guest and you come in every week, if I give you, ultimately what I do maybe give you is a travel mug for coffee, and every time you fill up the coffee, you get it for 99 cents versus the regular price, right? Then you understand that program and you get rewarded. And oh, by the way, when people see you with this special mug in the store, they ask you about it, right? I mean, there's this, thing that always happens at restaurants, right? Whenever a plate of food comes out that looks really good, you say, what was that, right? Because you can't necessarily tell that from ordering in the menu. So I think there's ways to do that to recognize them, because I've heard frequent guests say, I'm one of your best guests, but you don't know that, right? So is there a way that when they come in and register at the front, the cashier can say, thanks for being a platinum member, right? Those kinds of things, and to give them offers that work for them, right? I mean, I know competitors who give out coupons that say, hey, free cup of coffee every day for the next month. And they're giving that only to guests who've never been in and had a cup of coffee, right? So whether that's of value to them or not, or whether it would be better off to say, hey, I noticed you came in X number of times this, or we're going to have a tasting for new products, invite you in for a tasting for new products to make you think that you're kind of part of those guests and how we do that. We've also done voice calls where it recognizes your phone number and says, I noticed last time you had a chicken pomodori and a tomato soup. Would you like to make the same order? Is there a way to do those kind of things? And ultimately, is there a way to do voice ordering in the store, right? Because especially when you think of the pandemic, I've got to disinfect the kiosk if I'm going to have kiosks, right? But if I'm going to have voice ordering, that may be, and it's actually easier. It's like, I can just tell you, I want a chicken pomodori and a tomato soup. I don't have to click this and check this box and do all these other kinds of things as part of that. So I think there's innovative ways to let people know that they're recognized as being customers and that you value them. So.
Yeah, on a related topic, do you guys accept mobile wallets in your stores and mobile payments, tapless payments?
Yeah, we have Apple Pay. Yeah, we'll take those things. Right. Because it's interesting. I think in this world, people are going to want to have less handing over things, and right. So there's technologies like that are much, while in the past may have not caught on as much. I think in today's world, where you don't want to have that contact all the time, where you can just transmit that data, right? So I think there are things like that I, in my mind, I'd like to jump over the kiosk ordering and try to figure out, how do I have the cone of silence come down and give you the ability to order, which is kind of the same as, ordering, normal ordering process, right? I don't have to teach you a new way to deal with the technology, right? And with Alexa and Siri and all these other kinds of things, people are getting more and more accustomed to those kind of things. So, that way I can break the barrier between the customer and the cashier, right? And potentially have that person on the floor helping out as opposed to sitting behind the counter. So.
Yeah, I was at a large unnamed home improvement store this weekend, and when I went to check out, I did self-checkout, so I didn't have to talk to anybody, but then I realized they actually didn't accept Apple Pay or mobile wallets, and I had to pull my credit card out, and I thought, this is something that needs to change pretty quick. I think that's actually going to be a point of preference for customers now, not having to pull out credit cards and hand them to people or swipe them. So interesting. Darius, I have another big question for you, since I know you like these big ones. So there's obviously a big interplay between grocery stores and restaurants and how people choose to consume food, whether it's eating in, eating out. what are some of the long-term implications of the pandemic that you think we're going to see affect your business, and how customers, change their, dining habits?
Well, maybe I could punt this one a little bit and say we're still, in the beginning of the first inning on this one. So prognostication is going to be really difficult. What I could say is, with respect to restaurants, I think this relates to, relates to what Frank was saying. There are a lot of local restaurants that are favorites around, let's say, the geographies of where our physical stores are located. And a lot of them have, been injured, I think is safe to say, and some of them mortally. Some of the restaurants have reached out to us and said, look, we've got real popular dishes, and we're really known for pizza in Northern California, but we're really known for our cookie dough in Southern California. We'd like to build our brand around these sort of, local consumer products that we'd like to put out into the market. And that's got traction, right? And so the thought of saying, oh, wait a minute, we have an order ahead capability for our delis. We could start stocking these corner bakery products. We have products from Wolfgang Puck. Why couldn't we have it from Corner Bakery? And why couldn't we take local favorites and begin to stock them in local, in local facilities? So, in Idaho, we have some things that we don't carry in Northern California that we don't carry at the Vons in Redondo Beach or in West Hollywood. I think the idea of creating local alleys or local areas where your favorites are available to you, both frozen and or prepared, and being able to deliver that is a really interesting hybrid. And since if we're considered an essential business, then in some respects, these restaurants don't go dark because of an outbreak in a location. So I think there's a lot of innovation and opportunity for us to try to support local communities, local restaurants. And I think also from a social reach standpoint, and getting away from the Google tags, and also in fear of the specter of Amazon, local, and long tail, very important. That doesn't necessarily answer your question completely. Which is,
I think you're right. It's an unanswerable question. I think everybody's got a lot of learning to do as we go, and we're going to have to be really nimble as an industry to see how consumer behavior changes and patterns. So we're down to the last 5 minutes. So I thought we would do a lightning round with a final question. So as we see this really big shift to digital and digital experiences, and all brands are now thinking about this a lot more, can each of you tell us one thing that's kind of at the top of your mind on what you're working on, or what you think brands and companies should be thinking about over the next 6 to 12 months as they look to dramatically enhance their own digital experiences and engage customers? And why don't we start with you, Brandon?
Yeah, I'm going to stay, I guess, in role or on brand here and offer more of a sort of data and measurability perspective. And I think the thing that is most top of mind for me, and that we're seeing our clients take advantage of to a certain degree, but I think is going to become more and more obvious and important than it has been historically, is we've talked a lot about today the owned company information that they could be looking at to understand consumer behavior and preference and so on. There's also the broader, or I guess external data perspective as well, and what data is available, let's say right now, that is better than what you have about your consumer base internally or owned directly from a point of sale perspective, that can be leading indicators to tell you information about how consumer preference or behaviors and appetites for different features and functionality, digitally and so on, is changing. And in particular, I think the mobile data world and mobile location data world is something that I would say is super important and worth paying attention to. From a marketing perspective, it's been accelerating fast, just from like a billboard or offline marketing perspective. How do you know someone actually saw the billboard? how often, what do they do beforehand, and so on. But what about when you think about this shift from, when people are starting to migrate back to work and what their behaviors are, and what their different mobile patterns are, their travel patterns, and even dig into things around like, are they making multiple stops? Are they, going straight home, and all these different things? These little benchmarks that we can start tracking, I think we can use as secondary and maybe in some cases primary indicators of how things are evolving over the next year or two, where obviously it's going to be, a steady climb back to business as usual.
Great, thanks, Brandon. Joe, what's top of mind for you?
Yeah, probably a variation on the same theme from Brandon. I'd say learn as much as you can about your customer base, who's staying with you, who's leaving, who's new, who's coming, how are they shopping, what are they buying, what do they care about? Learn as much as you can about that, and then spend your leadership time thinking about what in all that is good for your business and what do you want to retain and continue as we all watch how things unfold.
That's a great combination of ideas. Darius, what's most important to you?
Well, aside from what's already said, I won't repeat. Again, my big theme is value added. Like, what are our ways in which we can add more value to the customer shopping experience? And right now, what I'm personally focused on at the moment is recipes and meals, and to what extent we can use that as currency to remain relevant and to expand our reach amongst new audiences who may not necessarily be considering shopping with us.
Great, thank you, Darius. And then Frank, why don't you wrap us up with the most important thing on your mind right now?
Yeah, I think it's really kind of learning where the consumer's going. I think Brandon talked about it earlier. Where they are today is going to be different from where they are potentially 6 months from now, right? So making sure that we're looking at the data, making sure that we're responding in a way that has value added for them, is trying to find the sweet spot between the limited menu and expanding the menu to kind of grab our market share, and really understanding what's changed in the competitive set, right? Because I think there are going to be a lot of restaurants that don't come back. And so what does that mean in terms of what do we need to do to kind of fill that niche? And, whether that's talking about virtual restaurants that are coming in or doing those kind of things. So I think there's it'll be a very interesting, changeable, we can see it every week. The sales are different, and they're different by order type. And so how do we make sure that we're responding to that? So
that's great. Thank you, Frank. Yeah, so the one common thread for me that I think was pretty pervasive through the entire discussion here, and for me has been pervasive through my long career in retail, is the need to be focused on your customers. Customer centricity, putting the customer at the center of everything you do has always been critical to being successful in any kind of B2C business. And I think what's changed now is that the behaviors of customers are changing much more rapidly than they ever have in the past. But along with that, we have new tools in the digital space that really allow us to be a lot more nimble and to try to serve those needs in new ways. So I would just encourage everybody out here listening to always think about the customer at the center of all your decisions, and then try to use all the tools and the data that you have to do the best job you can serving those customers and helping them meet their goals and their objectives. And the better you do serving them, the more loyal they will be over time, and the more you will see them coming back in these new ways and new worlds we find ourselves these days. So I'd just like to thank everybody for joining us. Frank, Brandon, Joe, and Darius, it was great chatting with you guys today. And to everybody who's participated, as Maren said, we'll have a copy of the video out, and we will try to answer as many questions as we can right away for those who put questions in. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.